A ruthless MMA fighter shatters a 16-year-old kid's nose during what should have been light sparring, laughing as the teenager collapses in a pool of blood. The arrogant bully towers over his victim, flexing for his friends while the traumatized students watch in horror. But the quiet janitor mopping floors in the corner slowly removes his cleaning gloves. And this predator has no idea he just committed assault in front of Steven Seagal himself. The legendary martial artist steps forward. With deadly calm, his decades of aikido mastery about to teach some very painful lessons about respect and honor. While the bully brags about toughening up the injured kid, he doesn't realize he's facing a man who spent 50 years perfecting the art of destroying bullies without breaking a sweat. The MMA hotshot thinks his youth and modern training give him the advantage, but he's about to discover why some legends never fade. What happens when arrogance meets authentic mastery? Will the bully survive learning the difference between violence and martial arts? What happened next would terrorize the fighter for the rest of his pathetic existence. Before we jump back, and tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Danny Morrison pushed through the heavy glass doors of Riverside Martial Arts Academy, his sneakers squeaking against the polished wooden floor. The familiar scent of canvas mats and cleaning solution filled his nostrils as he stepped into the dojo's quiet sanctuary. Late afternoon sunlight streamed through tall windows, casting long shadows across the training area where ancient Japanese weapons hung in perfect rows along the walls. Danny-san called Master Eugene Watanabe from behind the reception desk, his weathered face creasing into a warm smile. At 75, the elderly sensei still moved with the precise grace of a lifetime martial artist, though his black hair had long since turned silver. "You are early today. Good. Shows dedication." Danny managed a shy grin, setting his backpack down carefully. 6 months of training hadn't completely erased his nervous habits, but the dojo felt safer than anywhere else in his world. Here, nobody cared that his parents were divorced or that he got picked on at school. Here, respect mattered more than social status. "I wanted to practice that throw you showed us yesterday," Danny said, bowing slightly as Master Watanabe had taught him. "I'm still not getting the footwork right." Master Watanabe nodded approvingly. "Patience, Danny-san. Aikido is not about speed. It's about understanding. When you understand your opponent's energy, technique becomes natural." He demonstrated the movement slowly, his compact frame flowing like water as he shifted from stance to stance. "See, not forcing, guiding." Danny watched intently, trying to absorb every detail. Master Watanabe had this way of making the most complex techniques look effortless, as if decades of practice had worn away everything unnecessary until only pure motion remained. Other students began filtering in for the evening class. Rebecca Chun, 14 and sharp as a blade, offered Danny a quick wave before changing into her GI. Tommy Rodriguez, 17 and built like a linebacker, clapped Danny on the shoulder with easy friendship. These were his people now. Kids who understood that strength came from discipline, not from putting others down. "Tonight we work on randori," Master Watanabe announced as the class gathered on the mats. "Freeform practice. Remember, we are not trying to defeat our partner. We are helping each other learn." Danny paired up with Tommy, who always took care not to use his size advantage unfairly. They moved through the flowing motions of attack and defense, each technique building. On the last, Danny felt his confidence growing with each successful throw, each moment when balance and timing came together perfectly. The class ended with formal bows and quiet reflection. As students began filing out into the gathering dusk, Danny noticed someone entering through the back door. A man in a simple gray uniform wheeled in a cleaning cart, moving with unusual quietness for someone in such a practical job. His face remained partially hidden in shadow, but something about his presence felt different, alert in a way that most people weren't. Master Watanabe bowed respectfully to the janitor, who returned the gesture with surprising formality. They exchanged a few words in what sounded like Japanese, though Danny couldn't make out the conversation from across the room. "Who's that?" Danny asked Rebecca as they gathered their gear. "Steve, I think. He's been cleaning here for a few weeks. Nice guy, but really quiet." Rebecca shrugged. "Why?" Danny glanced back at the janitor, who was methodically setting up his equipment with movements that seemed almost ritualistic in their precision. Nothing, just curious. Steve moved through the empty dojo with practiced silence, his mop gliding across the wooden floors in long, measured strokes. The students had left 20 minutes ago, but their energy still lingered in the space. Youthful determination mixing with the deeper current of tradition that Master Watanabe worked so hard to maintain. He noticed everything. The crack in the mirror that had grown wider since last week. The loose floorboard near the weapons rack that squeaked when stepped on wrong. The stack of unpaid bills partially hidden beneath training schedules on Master Watanabe's desk, visible through the open office door. Steve paused his cleaning to examine the bills more closely without touching them. Electric company, insurance, property management. The numbers told a story he'd seen too many times. A good man struggling to keep something valuable alive in a world that didn't always appreciate tradition. Steve-san, Master Watanabe's voice came from behind him, gentle but alert. The old sensei emerged from the changing area carrying 2 steaming cups. Would you like tea? Steve straightened, accepting the cup with both hands and a slight bow. Arigato gozaimasu, Watanabe-sensei. Master Watanabe's eyebrows rose slightly at the perfect pronunciation, but he said nothing. They stood in comfortable silence, 2 men who understood that some things didn't need explanation. The young one, Steve said quietly, nodding toward where Danny had been practicing. He has good spirit. Hi. Danny-san tries very hard. Difficult time for him now. Family troubles, problems at school. But here he finds peace. Master Watanabe sipped his tea thoughtfully. Martial arts can heal more than just body, yes? Steve nodded, his dark eyes scanning the traditional photographs lining the walls. Black and white images of Master Watanabe, with various martial arts legends from decades past. Men who had dedicated their lives to something greater than themselves. You know martial arts, Master Watanabe observed. It wasn't quite a question. Some, Steve replied carefully. Long time ago. They finished their tea in silence. Master Watanabe gathered his things and headed for the door, pausing to look back at the janitor who had already returned to his methodical cleaning. Steve-san, the old master said, thank you for caring about this place. After Master Watanabe left, Steve continued his work with even greater attention to detail. He repositioned every piece of equipment exactly where it belonged, ensuring the training weapons hung at precise angles, making sure the mats lay perfectly flat. When he reached the shrine to previous masters, a small alcove with photos of legendary martial artists who had passed on, he stopped completely. His reflection appeared in the glass covering the largest photograph, and for a moment, past and present seemed to merge. Steve bowed deeply to the shrine, holding the position for several long seconds. When he straightened, his movements carried a weight that spoke of years beyond counting, of battles fought and wisdom earned through fire. He gathered his cleaning supplies and headed for the door, turning off lights as he went. The dojo settled into darkness, but something protective lingered in the silence, a sense that this place was watched over by more than just memory. Outside, Steve disappeared into the night like a shadow, leaving no trace of his passage except floors that gleamed and an atmosphere that felt somehow safer than before. Marcus Briggs slammed through the front door of Riverside Martial Arts Academy like a man who owned the place. At 28, he carried himself with the aggressive confidence of someone who had never met a problem he couldn't punch his way through. His designer athletic wear cost more than most people made in a week, and the elaborate tattoos covering his arms told stories of victories in cages and rings across the country. Master Watanabe looked up from his morning meditation, his serene expression faltering slightly at the intrusion. The old sensei rose slowly, maintaining his dignity despite the obvious disruption to his peaceful routine. Can I help you? Master Watanabe asked in careful English, his voice carrying decades of dealing with difficult students. Yeah, you can help me. Briggs strode across the pristine training floor without removing his shoes, leaving dirty footprints on wood that Steve had cleaned to perfection the night before. I need this space for some real training. Heard you rent it out. Briggs towered over the elderly master, using his size to intimidate in a way that would have been unthinkable to anyone who truly understood martial arts. His cold eyes swept the traditional setup with obvious disdain, The formal bows, the respect for elders, the careful attention to ceremony that he clearly saw as weakness. This is traditional dojo, Master Watanabe replied carefully. We focus on discipline, respect, proper technique. Perhaps another gym would be more suitable for your needs. Listen, old man. Briggs pulled out a thick roll of cash, counting off $100 bills with theatrical flair. I'm not asking for a philosophy lesson. I need space to train real fighters, not kids playing dress-up in pajamas. You want this money or not? Master Watanabe's eyes fixed on the cash with the painful recognition of a man watching his principles collide with harsh reality. The unpaid bills on his desk seemed to grow heavier in the silence that followed. What kind of training? The old master asked reluctantly. MMA, mixed martial arts. You know, actual fighting instead of this ancient dancing nonsense. Briggs gestured dismissively at the weapons displays and formal photographs. I've got guys who need to prepare for real competitions. They need space to work without a bunch of rules and bowing and all that traditional garbage. Briggs counted out more bills, the sound of paper money unusually loud in the quiet dojo. $2 grand a week. Cash. All I need is the space after hours and maybe some sparring partners from your little karate club. Give these kids a chance to see what real fighting looks like. Master Watanabe closed his eyes briefly, as if seeking guidance from the masters, whose photos watched silently from the walls. When he opened them again, something had died behind his weathered features. There must be rules, he said finally. No permanent injury to students. Respect for the space. Clean up when finished. Briggs grinned, a predator sensing weakness. Sure, Pops. Whatever you need to hear. He dropped the cash on the reception desk like he was paying for a hamburger. I'll be back tonight with my crew. Make sure your kids understand they're about to get an education. As Briggs swaggered toward the door, he turned back with an afterthought. Oh, and get rid of the shrine stuff and the weapons. Real fighters don't need props. Master Watanabe's hands clenched into fists at his sides, but he said nothing. The door slammed behind Briggs, leaving the old sensei alone with his compromised principles and the sound of dirty money hitting his desk. Through the window, a familiar gray uniform appeared as Steve arrived early for his shift. Their eyes met across the glass, shame and understanding passing between them in a moment that needed no words. Steve entered the dojo to find it transformed into something he barely recognized. The respectful atmosphere had been replaced by aggressive music pounding from a portable speaker. Traditional equipment had been shoved aside to make room for modern heavy bags and grappling mats. The sacred space where students learned discipline and respect now reeked of sweat, ego, and casual violence. Marcus Briggs commanded the center of the room like a general surveying his territory. 3 other fighters worked around him, younger men in their early 20s who moved with the restless energy of predators seeking prey. They wore expensive shorts and form-fitting shirts that displayed their physiques like weapons. Steve began his cleaning routine with mechanical precision, but his entire demeanor had shifted. Where before he had moved with the quiet efficiency of invisible service, now he carried himself with the coiled alertness of a professional observer. Every sense was focused on the activity around him while maintaining the perfect camouflage of custodial work. Come on, Jerry, Briggs shouted at one of his sparring partners, a lean young man who was obviously outmatched. Stop dancing around like a ballerina. This is supposed to be training, not a tea party. Jerry Walsh tried to circle away from Briggs's superior reach, but the makeshift ring gave him little room to maneuver. When he attempted a takedown, Briggs sprawled and drove an elbow down into Jerry's ribs with unnecessary force. The sound of impact echoed through the dojo like a gunshot. Jerry rolled away, gasping and clutching his side. Man, that was harder than we agreed on. Harder than we agreed on, Briggs mocked, his voice dripping with contempt. What are you, 5 years old? This is fighting, not patty cake. You want to compete with real men, you better learn to take real shots. Steve's mop stopped moving as he watched Jerry struggle to his feet, obviously favoring his injured ribs. The young fighter tried to continue, but his timing was off, his breathing shallow. When he attempted another technique, Briggs caught him with a knee to the stomach that doubled him over completely. Pathetic, Briggs announced to his audience of cronies, who laughed on cue. This is why traditional martial arts are dead. They turn fighters into victims who can't handle real pressure. Jerry sat on the mat, head hanging in defeat and humiliation. His dreams of proving himself had collided with the reality of training. With someone who saw hurting others as entertainment rather than education. Steve's grip tightened on the mop handle until his knuckles showed white beneath the skin. His jaw worked silently as he watched the systematic destruction of everything this dojo represented. But he continued cleaning, invisible and ignored, gathering information with the patience of a professional. When Briggs's crew finally left, the dojo looked like a crime scene. Equipment scattered, mats askew, the respectful atmosphere poisoned by casual cruelty. Steve set down his cleaning supplies and began the slow process of restoration. He moved each piece of traditional equipment back to its exact original position with the precision of someone who had memorized every detail. The weapons returned to their proper places on the wall. The shrine to previous masters was carefully dusted and straightened. Every element of respect and tradition that Briggs had disrupted was methodically restored. Master Watanabe entered as Steve finished, taking in the returned order with grateful recognition. The old sensei approached the shrine and bowed deeply, as if apologizing to the masters whose legacy he felt he had betrayed. Arigato gozaimasu, Steve-san, Master Watanabe whispered, his voice heavy with shame and gratitude. Steve's response came in perfect Japanese, pronounced with the deep understanding of someone who truly comprehended its meaning. Doida shimashite, Watanabe-sensei. Some things are worth protecting. In the silence that followed, both men understood that lines had been drawn and choices would soon need to be made. Danny arrived at the dojo with nervous energy crackling through his movements. The familiar sanctuary felt different tonight, charged with an undercurrent of tension that made his skin prickle. Several of Briggs's fighters were already present, their aggressive presence dominating the space like wolves claiming new territory. Master Watanabe stood near the center of the room, his usual calm demeanor strained around the edges. His eyes carried the weight of compromise, and Danny felt a flutter of unease in his stomach. Something was wrong, though he couldn't quite identify what. "Welcome, students," Master Watanabe said as Rebecca, Tommy, and the other regular members gathered uncertainly. "Tonight we have guests who will be sharing our training space." Briggs emerged from the corner where he'd been wrapping his hands, his predatory grin sweeping across the assembled teenagers like a searchlight. "That's right, kids. Uncle Marcus is here to show you what real fighting looks like." Danny felt. Rebecca stepped closer to him, her usual confidence replaced by wariness. Tommy's easy smile had vanished, replaced by the guarded expression of someone sensing danger. The other students clustered together instinctively, recognizing the threat even if they couldn't name it. "Now, I know you've all been playing martial arts with Grandpa here," Briggs continued, his voice dripping with condescension. "But tonight, you get a chance to see actual combat. Not this bowing and dancing nonsense, but real skills that work when someone's trying to hurt you." "Master," Watanabe's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Mr. Briggs has agreed to demonstrate some modern techniques. Participation is voluntary, and all sparring will be light contact only." "Light contact," Briggs laughed, the sound harsh in the respectful space. "That's not how fighting works, Pops. But sure, we'll start gentle with the babies." Tommy stepped forward first, his athletic build giving him confidence that Danny wished he possessed. "I'll try it," Tommy said, though his voice carried less certainty than usual. The sparring session was brutal to watch. Tommy, despite his strength and basic training, was completely outclassed. Briggs toyed with him like a cat with a mouse, landing strikes that were supposedly light, but left Tommy gasping and off balance. When Tommy tried to tap out after a particularly hard shot to the ribs, Briggs pretended not to see it. "Come on, tough guy," Briggs taunted. "I thought you were ready for real training." Rebecca wisely declined when offered her turn, her sharp mind recognizing the trap that testosterone and pride were setting. But Danny felt something stirring in his chest, a desperate need to prove he wasn't the weak kid everyone assumed him to be. "I'll go," Danny said, his voice smaller than he intended. Master Watanabe's eyes widened with alarm. "Danny-san, perhaps. The little one wants to play?" Briggs crowed, selecting himself as Danny's opponent with obvious relish. "Don't worry, kid. I'll take it real easy on you." In the corner, Steve had stopped mopping entirely. His grip on the handle had turned his knuckles white, and his dark eyes fixed on the unfolding scene with laser intensity. Danny stepped onto the mat with legs that felt like water beneath him. His hands shook as he adjusted his protective gear, the familiar weight of his sparring gloves offering no comfort against what was coming. Across from him, Briggs bounced on his toes with predatory anticipation, his size advantage suddenly seeming enormous in the confined space. Master Watanabe positioned himself between them, his weathered hands raised for attention. "Rules are simple," he announced, though his voice carried underlying tension. "Light contact only. Immediate stop when either fighter taps out or I call halt. Respect for your opponent at all times." Briggs nodded with mock solemnity, but Danny caught the cold amusement in his eyes. This man had no intention of following rules that didn't serve his purposes. "Ready, kid?" Briggs asked, barely waiting for Danny's nervous nod before beginning. To circle, the first few exchanges seemed almost playful. Briggs used his superior reach to tag Danny with light jabs, more demonstration than attack. Danny tried to apply the techniques Master Watanabe had taught him, but his movements felt clumsy and slow compared to his opponent's fluid aggression. "Not bad for a beginner," Briggs said loudly enough for the watching students to hear. "But let's see how you handle some real pressure." The shift was subtle at first. Briggs's strikes came harder, faster, with less time between them for Danny to recover. A jab that had been a gentle tap became a sharp snap that rattled Danny's teeth. A body shot that should have been light contact drove the air from his lungs. Danny raised his hands in the universal gesture for timeout, but Briggs ignored it completely. "Come on, don't quit on me now. We're just getting started." Master Watanabe stepped forward. "That is enough for back off, Pops," Briggs snarled, without taking his eyes off Danny. The kid's learning valuable lessons here. Danny tried to circle away, but Briggs cut off his escape routes with practiced ease. Every attempt to create distance was met with another flurry of strikes, each one harder than the last. Danny's defensive techniques, adequate against cooperative partners, crumbled under the pressure of genuine aggression. A hook to the body folded Danny over, and when he straightened up gasping, Briggs was already moving. A straight right hand caught Danny flush on the nose, and he felt cartilage shift with a wet cracking sound that echoed through the suddenly silent dojo. Blood streamed down Danny's face as he staggered backward, his hands automatically rising to protect his damaged nose. The metallic taste filled his mouth, and his eyes watered so badly he could barely see. "Stop!" Rebecca screamed from the sidelines. "I'm trying to," Danny gasped, raising both hands in surrender. But Briggs was already launching his finishing combination. "This is what real fighting feels like, kid." In the corner, Steve had abandoned all pretense of cleaning. He stood perfectly still, his body coiled with barely contained violence, watching Briggs close in on the injured teenager like a predator moving in for the kill. Danny's world narrowed to the approaching fist and the certainty that something terrible was about to happen. Briggs feinted low, drawing Danny's desperate guard downward, then exploded upward with a devastating elbow strike. The bone connected, with Danny's already broken nose with a sound like a tree branch snapping. The 16-year-old's head snapped back, his eyes rolling up to show white as his body went limp. Danny crumpled to the mat like a discarded puppet, blood pooling beneath his face as his consciousness fled. The silence that followed was deafening. Even Briggs's cronies stopped their casual laughter as the reality of what had just happened sank in. "Danny!" Rebecca screamed, rushing toward her fallen friend. Tommy was already kneeling beside Danny, his face pale with shock as he tried to stem the flow of blood with his shirt. "He's not moving, Sensei. He's really hurt." Master Watanabe dropped to his knees beside the unconscious teenager, his fingers searching for a pulse while his eyes assessed the damage. Danny's breathing was shallow and irregular, his face a mask of blood and swelling that made him barely recognizable. "Call ambulance," Master Watanabe ordered, his accented English thick with emotion. Now, Briggs stood over the fallen boy, flexing his arms and grinning at his audience. "Relax, everybody. Kid just learned what happens when you step into the ring with real fighters. This is called education." His friends laughed nervously, but the sound felt forced and hollow in the face of Danny's motionless form. Even they seemed to recognize that lines had been crossed. He was trying to surrender. Tommy shouted, his voice cracking with rage and helplessness. You saw him tapping out. I didn't see nothing, Briggs replied with casual cruelty. Kid kept coming at me. Had to defend myself. That's how real fighting works. You don't get timeouts when someone's trying to hurt you. Master Watanabe looked up from Danny's still form, his weathered face transformed by a rage decades in the making. Get out, he said quietly, his voice carrying the authority of a lifetime spent commanding respect. Get out of my dojo. Now. Briggs laughed, turning to gather his gear with theatrical slowness. Sure thing, Grandpa. Thanks for the entertainment. Your student might want to stick to knitting from now on. As Briggs bent to pick up his water bottle, a voice cut through the chaos with quiet authority. That's enough. Every head turned toward the corner where the janitor had been working. Steve stood perfectly still beside his abandoned mop, no longer invisible, no longer hiding. His stance had shifted from servant to warrior, balanced, centered, radiating. A controlled lethality that made the air itself seem dangerous. The transformation was so complete that for a moment, nobody moved. The humble custodian was gone, replaced by something far more dangerous. Steve's dark eyes held Briggs with the focused intensity of a predator selecting its moment to strike. Who the hell are you supposed to be? Briggs demanded, but his voice carried less confidence than before. Steve began removing his cleaning gloves with deliberate, measured movements. Each motion was precise, almost ceremonial, as if he were preparing for a ritual that had been postponed too long. The first glove hit the floor with a soft sound that seemed to echo like thunder. Master Watanabe's breath caught in his throat as recognition dawned. The janitor's transformed posture, the way he moved his hands, the sudden aura of lethal competence. Details clicked into place like pieces of a puzzle he'd been unconsciously assembling for weeks. Steven Seagal? The old master whispered. In disbelief. The name hit the room like a physical force. Briggs's cronies stepped backward instinctively, their swagger evaporating as they processed what they'd just heard. Rebecca's eyes widened to saucers. Tommy forgot to maintain pressure on Danny's bleeding nose as he stared at the living legend standing 10 feet away. Seagal moved with fluid grace to kneel beside the unconscious teenager, his hands checking pulse and examining injuries with the precision of someone who'd seen too much violence. His voice remained calm, but it carried unmistakable authority as he gave rapid instructions. Rebecca, get ice from the office freezer. Tommy, keep his head elevated but don't move his neck. Watanabe-sensei, call 911 and tell them we have a 16-year-old male with facial fractures and possible concussion. His medical knowledge was immediately apparent. This wasn't guesswork, but professional assessment. Danny's breathing stabilized under Seagal's careful positioning, though he remained unconscious. Briggs found his voice, though it sounded strained. I don't care if you're Bruce Lee himself, old man. That kid got exactly what he deserved. Maybe next time he'll think twice before. Quiet. Seagal's voice cut through Briggs's bluster like a blade. He stood slowly, his movement so controlled it seemed to take forever. When he finally faced Briggs directly, the temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. You broke the nose of a child who was trying to surrender, Seagal said with deadly calm. You ignored his attempts to tap out. You showed no respect for your teacher, your opponent, or the sacred space where students come to learn. Briggs laughed, but the sound came out forced and brittle. Sacred space? It's a gym, movie star. And that wasn't a child. That was a wannabe fighter who couldn't handle real training. Real training. Seagal's eyebrows rose slightly. Is that what you call bullying teenagers? Interesting definition. The aikido master's hands hung loose at his sides, but every person in the room could feel the violence coiled within his stillness. He didn't need to threaten or posture. His presence alone made promises about consequences. Briggs rolled his shoulders and bounced on his toes, trying to reclaim his aggressive confidence. Look, I don't know what movies you were in, but this is real life. I'm a professional fighter. You're a washed-up actor who probably hasn't thrown a real punch in 20 years. Seagal's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his eyes, a cold amusement that was far more terrifying than anger. You want to teach lessons about real fighting? He asked, his voice carrying the quiet authority of absolute confidence. Class is in session. Behind him, Danny stirred slightly, his eyelids fluttering as consciousness began to return. The sight of the injured teenager seemed to settle something final in Seagal's demeanor. He was no longer just a janitor who'd been discovered, or even a legend defending his reputation. He was a protector who'd watched a child be brutalized, and the reckoning was about to begin. Briggs laughed, the harsh sound echoing through the dojo as he rolled his shoulders and settled into his fighting stance. "Bring it on, old man. Let's see what those movie fights taught you about real combat." His cronies spread out around the impromptu ring, phones already recording what they expected to be easy entertainment. In their minds, this was about to become viral footage of a washed-up actor getting demolished by a real fighter. Seagal's response was immediate and educational. When Briggs launched his first aggressive charge, a wild haymaker designed to end the fight quickly, Seagal simply wasn't there anymore. Using classic aikido principles, he redirected the incoming force with minimal effort, sending Briggs sliding across the mat without appearing to use any strength at all. Briggs scrambled to his feet, confusion replacing cockiness. "Lucky move, Grandpa." The second attack was more cautious but equally futile. Briggs threw a proper combination: jab, cross, hook. But Seagal flowed around the strikes like water, his movements so economical they seemed almost lazy. When Briggs overextended on the hook, Seagal's finger touched a precise point on his left shoulder. Briggs's arm went completely dead, hanging useless at his side. "What the hell?" Briggs stared at his unresponsive limb in shock. "What did you do?" "Pressure point," Seagal explained calmly, circling with predatory patience. "Temporary paralysis of the brachial plexus. The feeling will return in approximately 3 minutes." Master Watanabe watched in amazement from beside Danny, who was now conscious and propped against the wall with ice pressed to his swollen face. The teenager's eyes were wide with wonder despite his pain. He was witnessing something that belonged in legend. Briggs tried to compensate for his dead arm by going low, attempting a takedown with his remaining functional limb. Seagal allowed him to get close, then demonstrated a wrist manipulation so subtle it looked like sleight of hand. Briggs dropped to his knees instantly, his face contorting with unexpected agony. "Traditional martial arts emphasize control," Seagal observed, maintaining the submission hold with casual ease. "Violence without wisdom is just cruelty. Strength without purpose is just bullying." He released the hold, and Briggs fell forward, onto his hands, gasping. The feeling was returning to his left arm in painful tingles, but his confidence had been completely shattered. "This is impossible," one of Briggs's friends muttered, his phone still recording but his expression uncertain. "Marcus trains with killers, real fighters." Seagal heard the comment and turned his attention to the speaker with mild interest. "Real fighters understand that the most dangerous opponent is often the one who doesn't need to prove anything." Briggs struggled to his feet, his movements now cautious and defensive. The predatory swagger was gone, replaced by the wariness of someone who discovered he was outclassed in ways he'd never imagined. "You're stronger than you look," Seagal continued, allowing Briggs to recover fully. "But strength without wisdom becomes weakness when facing true mastery. Would you like another lesson?" The question hung in the air like a challenge and a warning combined. Danny struggled to focus through the fog of pain and medication, but even his concussed brain could process what he was witnessing. The quiet janitor who'd cleaned around them for weeks was systematically dismantling a professional fighter without breaking a sweat. "Is that really Steven Seagal?" Rebecca whispered, her voice filled with awe. Master Watanabe nodded slowly, his eyes never leaving the demonstration of aikido mastery unfolding before them. "I suspected, but was not certain. His movements, his understanding of tradition. Now I know why he seemed familiar." Seagal stepped back, giving Briggs space to regroup while addressing the watching students. "True martial arts aren't about domination," he said, his voice carrying the authority of decades spent perfecting his craft. "They're about protection, about using minimum force to achieve maximum effect." Through the office window, Master Watanabe could see Seagal's real reason for being here becoming clearer. This wasn't coincidence. The legendary martial artist had been investigating something, and Briggs's operation had triggered his intervention. "You've been watching us," Master Watanabe said, understanding dawning in his voice. "Not just cleaning, investigating." Seagal nodded without taking his eyes off Briggs, who was testing his recovered arm with obvious reluctance. Reports of young fighters disappearing from traditional schools, promising students suffering mysterious training injuries. Your dojo fit the pattern of places being targeted. Danny's head cleared enough to process this information. You think they were going to recruit us for something? I know they were, Seagal replied grimly. Underground fighting circuits that prey on disciplined fighters from traditional backgrounds. They use intimidation and financial pressure to force participation in illegal matches where serious injury isn't accidental. It's the main attraction. Briggs's phone buzzed with an incoming call. He glanced at the screen and his face went pale. Shit, that's my boss. Answer it, Seagal suggested mildly. But put it on speaker. I'm curious what your employer thinks about tonight's performance. Briggs hesitated, clearly torn between fear of his boss and fear of the legend standing before him. The phone continued buzzing insistently. Answer it, Seagal repeated, and this time it wasn't a suggestion. With trembling fingers, Briggs accepted the call and activated speaker mode. A gravelly voice filled the dojo, carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. Marcus, what the hell is happening over there? My sources say you've got problems. Mr. Torino, it's complicated. We ran into some unexpected what? You're dealing with a bunch of kids and an old karate teacher. How complicated can it be? Seagal stepped closer to the phone, his presence forcing Briggs to retreat. Actually, Mr. Torino, it's become quite complicated indeed. The silence on the other end stretched for several heartbeats before Torino's voice returned, noticeably more cautious. Who is this? Someone who's very interested in your recruiting methods, Seagal replied. And someone who's going to ensure your operation finds new targets. Listen, friend, I don't know who you think you are, but you're interfering with legitimate business interests. I suggest you walk away before this gets unpleasant. Seagal's smile was cold and humorless. Mr. Torino, unpleasant is exactly what I specialize in. The question is whether you're smart enough to recognize when you're outmatched. The call ended abruptly, leaving the dojo in tense silence. The front door chimed as Kane entered with 3 additional men, their presence immediately shifting the atmosphere from tense to dangerous. These weren't gym buddies or amateur fighters. They moved with the professional competence of career criminals who'd seen real violence. Kane surveyed the scene with cold calculation, Briggs nursing his injured pride and arm, the scattered traditional students, and the man who'd somehow disrupted their carefully planned operation. Steven Seagal, Kane said, his voice carrying recognition and grudging respect. Vincent Torino sends his compliments. He'd like to discuss a business proposition with you. Seagal positioned himself between the newcomers and the students, his stance relaxed but ready. I'm listening. Mr. Torino runs exclusive entertainment events for discerning clients, Kane explained, his tone carefully professional. High-stakes competitions featuring skilled martial artists. The pay is substantial, the medical coverage excellent, and the exposure can launch serious careers. Danny, still propped against the wall with ice on his face, felt something cold settle in his stomach. This sounded like a sales pitch, but the men delivering it looked like executioners. What kind of competitions? Master Watanabe asked, though his tone suggested he already suspected the answer. Mixed martial arts exhibitions, Kane replied smoothly. No weight classes, minimal rules, authentic combat that showcases real skill rather than sport limitations. Seagal's expression remained neutral, but his voice carried understated menace. And if someone chooses not to participate in these exhibitions? Kane's smile never wavered, but something predatory flickered behind his eyes. Mr. Torino is very persuasive. He's built quite a network of martial arts schools that benefit from his patronage. Traditional dojos like this one, for instance, often struggle financially. Proper backing can make the difference between survival and closure. The threat was delivered with corporate politeness, but everyone in the room understood its meaning. Master Watanabe's face went pale as he grasped the implications for his struggling school. Of course, Kane continued, occasionally people make poor decisions about cooperation. When that happens, Mr. Torino sometimes withdraws his support entirely. Students transfer to other schools, enrollment drops, accidents happen during training. It's unfortunate, but business is business. Rebecca moved closer to Tommy, her sharp mind immediately grasping the scope of what they were facing. This wasn't just about one night or one dojo. It was about an organized criminal network that had been systematically exploiting martial arts schools. Seagal listened to the entire pitch without interruption, his face revealing nothing of his thoughts. When Kane finished, the silence stretched uncomfortably before the aikido master responded. Interesting proposition, Seagal said finally. But I have a counteroffer. Kane raised an eyebrow. Oh, you and your organization find new territory to pollute. Traditional martial arts schools are off-limits. Students like these deserve to learn discipline and respect, not become victims of your entertainment industry. Kane's professional demeanor slipped slightly, revealing the violence underneath. Mr. Seagal, I don't think you understand the scope of what you're interfering with. This isn't some movie where one man takes on an organization. This is real life, with real consequences. Seagal's response was delivered with the quiet confidence of absolute certainty. Mr. Kane, real consequences are exactly what I specialize in. Kane's demeanor shifted from persuasive to threatening as he gestured to his companions. Mr. Torino doesn't like being told no, especially by washed-up actors who think they're tough. The three men with Kane spread out strategically, their movements suggesting extensive experience with intimidation and violence. But instead of the easy compliance they expected, they found themselves facing something they hadn't anticipated, a legend who'd spent decades perfecting the art of controlled destruction. Last chance, movie star, Kane continued. Mr. Torino is offering you the opportunity to join a profitable enterprise. Refuse, and you'll discover that Hollywood fighting and real-world consequences are very different things. Seagal's response was to demonstrate the difference between performance and reality. When Kane nodded to his largest enforcer, a mountain of muscle named Kozlov, the attack came fast and brutal. But Seagal was already moving, redirecting the incoming force with an aikido throw that sent the giant crashing into the weapon's display. Ancient practice, swords clattered to the floor, around Kozlov's motionless form. The second attacker learned that reach and speed meant nothing against perfect timing. Seagal caught his extended arm in a joint lock that dropped him screaming to his knees, the sound of hyperextended ligaments audible throughout the dojo. Kane backed toward the door, his confidence evaporating as he witnessed his supposedly invincible team neutralized in seconds. This isn't over, Seagal. Mr. Torino has resources you can't imagine. I'm counting on it, Seagal replied, releasing his hold on the second attacker, who collapsed clutching his damaged arm. Please give Mr. Torino my regards. Tell him I'm very interested in meeting him personally. After Kane and his remaining functional enforcer helped their injured companions out of the dojo, an uneasy quiet settled over the space. Danny struggled to process what he'd witnessed, violence so controlled and efficient it seemed almost supernatural. That was incredible. Tommy breathed, his voice filled with awe. I've never seen anything like that. Seagal began straightening the displaced weapons with the same methodical care he'd shown during his cleaning duties. Traditional Aikido emphasizes using an opponent's force against them. Size and aggression become disadvantages when properly redirected. Master Watanabe watched this restoration of order with deep respect. You have honored my dojo, Seagal-sensei, but I fear we have made dangerous enemies. The enemies were already there, Seagal replied. Now they simply know they've been discovered. Rebecca, her analytical mind working through the implications, spoke up with obvious concern. They're going to come back, aren't they? With more people, more weapons? Seagal paused in his weapon arrangement to face the students directly. Yes, which is why your training needs to change. If you're going to be involved in this situation, you need to be prepared for what's coming. Danny, despite his injuries and lingering pain, sat up straighter. You mean real training? Like actual fighting skills? I mean training that could save your life, Seagal corrected. The kind of preparation that turns potential victims into people who can protect themselves and others. The transformation from janitor to legend was complete, but now a new role was emerging, teacher and protector of the next generation. The next evening, Seagal began the most intensive training session any of them had ever experienced. Gone was the gentle, traditional approach of Master Watanabe's classes. This was combat preparation, practical, brutal, and designed to create survivors rather than sport competitors. Forget everything you think you know about fair fighting, Seagal instructed as Danny, Rebecca, and Tommy gathered on the mats despite Danny's still healing injuries. The people we're dealing with don't follow rules. They use whatever advantages they can find: numbers, weapons, surprise, intimidation. He demonstrated situational awareness techniques that transformed their understanding of personal safety. How to identify escape routes in any room. How to recognize the behavioral patterns that preceded violence. How to use everyday objects as weapons when traditional ones weren't available. Tommy, you're strong, but you fight like you're in a boxing ring, Seagal observed, correcting the teenager's stance. Real violence happens in parking lots, hallways, confined spaces where your reach advantage disappears. For Rebecca, he emphasized speed and precision over power. Your intelligence is your greatest weapon. Think 3 moves ahead. Use your opponent's expectations against them. Danny received the most attention, partly due to his injuries, but mostly because Seagal recognized something in the teenagers. Determination. You've been a victim, Seagal told him bluntly. Now you choose: stay a victim or become someone who protects other potential victims. The training was interrupted by Master Watanabe's urgent entrance. His face was pale with worry as he approached Seagal with a phone in his trembling hands. Seagal-sensei, I received disturbing news. Master Lee from Dragon's Path Academy. His school was attacked tonight. 3 students hospitalized. Lee-sensei is missing. Seagal's jaw tightened as he absorbed this information. The pattern was escalating faster than he'd anticipated. Torino wasn't just responding to the previous night's confrontation, he was accelerating his entire operation. They're moving against multiple targets simultaneously, Seagal said, his tactical mind already analyzing the implications. Divide our attention, force us to react instead of plan. Rebecca's sharp intellect immediately grasped the strategy. They're trying to overwhelm us. Make us choose which schools to protect and which to sacrifice. Exactly. Which means we need to take the fight to them instead of waiting for the next attack. Seagal moved to the window, scanning the street for surveillance. They'll expect us to play defense. Time to show them what offense looks like. Tommy cracked his knuckles eagerly. What's the plan? But before Seagal could answer, the dojo's lights went out. Emergency lighting cast eerie shadows as the sound of multiple vehicles surrounded the building. Through the windows, they could see armed figures taking positions. Plan A just changed to Plan B, Seagal said grimly, his voice carrying the calm of someone who'd faced impossible odds before. Everyone get behind the heavy bags. And remember everything I just taught you. You're about to need it. Kane's voice echoed through a bullhorn from outside. Steven Seagal. Mr. Torino wants to discuss terms. Come out peacefully, and no one else gets hurt. Danny looked at his teacher with desperate hope. What do we do? Seagal's smile was cold and dangerous. We teach them why you never corner a predator in his own territory. The assault began with flashbang grenades thrown through the front windows, filling the dojo with blinding light and deafening noise. But Seagal had anticipated this. He'd already moved his students to positions behind the heavy training equipment that provided both cover and tactical advantage. Stay low, move when I move, and remember, they want you alive, Seagal called out over the chaos. That gives us options they don't have. Kane's team entered through multiple breach points, their tactical gear and automatic weapons transforming the peaceful dojo into a war zone. But they'd made a crucial mistake. They were fighting a legend on ground he'd spent weeks learning intimately. Seagal moved through the darkness like a ghost, his intimate knowledge of every weapon, obstacle, and hiding place in the dojo giving him overwhelming advantage. The first infiltrator went down to a thrown practice sword that caught him in the throat. The second discovered that traditional wooden training weapons could be just as deadly as modern firearms in the right hands. Danny watched in amazement as his teacher flowed from shadow to shadow, each movement precise and purposeful. This wasn't the choreographed violence of movies. This was brutal, efficient combat designed to neutralize threats with minimal exposure. Rebecca, Tommy, work your way toward the back exit, Seagal instructed between eliminating threats. Danny, you're with me. Time for advanced lessons. But as they moved toward potential escape, Kane's voice cut through the chaos with devastating news. Nice try, Seagal. But we've got insurance. Through the smoke and confusion, they could see 2 of Kane's men dragging in Master Watanabe, the elderly sensei bound and clearly injured. Behind them came another pair escorting a terrified young man Danny recognized from newspaper photos, Master Lee's star student from Dragon's Path Academy. "Here's how this works," Kane announced, his voice carrying the confidence of someone holding all the cards. "You surrender now, or we start executing hostages. Your choice, movie star." The tactical situation had shifted completely. Seagal's superior fighting skills meant nothing when innocent lives hung in the balance. He could take out Kane and his remaining men, but not before they killed the hostages. Master Watanabe caught Seagal's eye across the smoky dojo and shook his head almost imperceptibly, a teacher's final lesson about sacrifice and honor. But Seagal wasn't ready to accept that outcome. "What exactly does Torino want?" Seagal called out, his mind already working through alternatives. Kane's laugh was harsh and victorious. "Simple. You participate in tomorrow night's special event. Win or lose, the hostages go free afterward. Refuse, and they disappear tonight." The special event, Seagal knew that meant the underground fighting tournament where death wasn't just possible but expected. It was exactly the trap Torino had been preparing since Kane's first visit. But as Seagal prepared to surrender, Danny stepped out from behind cover. "Wait," the teenager said, his voice stronger than anyone expected. "I have a better idea." Danny's emergence from cover sent ice through Seagal's veins. The teenager had learned much in their brief training sessions, but he wasn't ready for what was about to happen. "Danny, get back behind cover," Seagal ordered, but the boy continued walking toward Kane with his hands raised. "I'm the one you really want, aren't I?" Danny said, his voice carrying surprising steadiness. "I'm the kid who got hurt, the victim who could testify about what happened here. I'm your loose end." Kane's eyes narrowed as he studied the approaching teenager. Smart kid. Smarter than his teacher, apparently. But Danny wasn't surrendering. He was creating opportunity. As he walked closer to Kane, Seagal realized the teenager was positioning himself between the hostages and their captors, using his apparent surrender to get within striking range. "Danny-san, no," Master Watanabe called out, understanding what his student was attempting. "It's okay, sensei," Danny replied, still moving forward. "You taught me that martial arts is about protecting others. Time to put that lesson to use." When Danny reached the optimal position, everything happened. At once, he dropped low and swept Kane's legs while simultaneously grabbing for the man's weapon. It wasn't a perfect technique. Danny lacked the experience for flawless execution, but it was enough to create chaos. Seagal exploded from concealment. As Kane stumbled, his legendary speed carrying him across the dojo before the other gunmen could react. Rebecca and Tommy, following their teacher's example, moved to help the hostages while the adults engaged the armed threats. The fight was brutal and desperate. Seagal's skill was overwhelming, but automatic weapons in a confined space with civilians present created impossible tactical constraints. Every move had to be perfect. One mistake would cost innocent lives. Kane, recovering from Danny's attack, grabbed the teenager and pressed a pistol to his head. "Enough. Everyone freeze, or the kid dies." The tableau that followed was exactly what Torino had planned. Seagal neutralized by his own protective instincts, surrounded by armed enemies with hostages ensuring his compliance. Very touching. Kane panted, blood running from his nose, where Danny's initial attack had connected. But ultimately futile. Torino knew you'd never sacrifice others to save yourself. That's what makes you predictable. Kane produced a business card from his tactical vest and threw it at Seagal's feet. "Tomorrow night, 11 p.m. Warehouse District, Pier 47. Come alone, or everyone you're trying to protect pays the price." As Kane's team prepared to withdraw with their hostages, Danny caught Seagal's eye one final time. Despite his fear, the teenager's expression carried determination and trust. Faith that his teacher would find a way to save them all. "Sensei," Danny said clearly, "remember what you taught me about using an opponent's strength against them." Before Kane could react to this apparent message, his team was already moving toward their vehicles, dragging the hostages with them into the night. Seagal stood alone in the ruins of the dojo, holding Kane's business card and processing Danny's final words. The teenager had given him something, a clue about how to turn this trap into an opportunity. The real game was just beginning. Police sirens wailed in the distance as Seagal surveyed the devastated dojo. Detective Morris arrived within minutes. His expression grim as he took in the destruction, shattered windows, bullet holes in the walls, and clear evidence of a major criminal operation. Jesus, Steven, what the hell happened here? Morris asked, using Seagal's real name now that his cover was blown. Torino's organization escalated faster than expected, Seagal replied, handing over the business card Kane had left behind. They've got Master Watanabe, Danny Morrison, and at least one student from another targeted school. Morris studied the address on the card, his cop instincts immediately recognizing the tactical problems it represented. Pier 47 is perfect for this kind of operation. Isolated, multiple escape routes by water, easy to control access. Classic criminal stronghold. Rebecca and Tommy emerged from the back room where they'd been hiding during the police arrival. Both teenagers looked shaken but determined, their brief taste of real violence having matured them rapidly. "We're going with you tomorrow night," Rebecca announced without preamble. "Absolutely not," Seagal replied immediately. "This isn't training anymore. These people kill for entertainment." "Danny's our friend," Tommy added, his usual easygoing demeanor replaced by steel. "And he saved our lives tonight. We don't abandon people who sacrifice for us." Morris looked between the legendary martial artist and the determined teenagers, recognizing a conflict that logic wouldn't resolve. "Steven, what's your tactical assessment? Can the department move on this location?" Seagal shook his head grimly. "Torino's too smart for a frontal assault. The moment he sees police, the hostages die. This has to be surgical, minimal visibility, maximum precision." "So you're planning to walk into an obvious trap with no backup?" Morris asked incredulously. "I'm planning to turn their trap into mine," Seagal corrected. "Danny gave me a clue before they took him. Something about using an opponent's strength against them." Rebecca's analytical mind immediately engaged with this puzzle. "He must have seen something, some weakness in their operation or setup that you can exploit." Through the broken windows, they could see news vans arriving as word of the attack spread. The story was already growing beyond their control. Legendary martial artist in armed confrontation with unknown criminals, students kidnapped, traditional dojo destroyed. The media attention actually helps, Seagal realized. Torino's operation depends on staying invisible. Public scrutiny is the last thing he wants. Morris's radio crackled with updates from other crime scenes. "Steven, we've got reports of similar attacks at 3 other martial arts schools across the city. Same pattern, forced entry, intimidation, students and teachers missing." The scope of Torino's operation was becoming clear. This wasn't just about recruiting fighters anymore. It was about sending a message to anyone who might resist his organization's expansion. "How many people can he have?" Tommy asked, trying to process the scale of what they were facing. "Enough," Seagal replied grimly. "But organizations like this have a weakness. They depend on reputation and fear. Take out the leadership, and the whole structure collapses." As emergency crews worked to secure the crime scene, Seagal began planning for what might be his final confrontation. Tomorrow night would determine whether justice prevailed or whether Torino's criminal empire continued expanding into the world of traditional martial arts. The war for the soul of martial arts was about to reach its climax. Seagal spent the morning in methodical preparation, transforming the back room of the damaged dojo into a tactical planning center. Maps of the warehouse district covered every surface, marked with approach routes, escape paths, and potential sniper positions. This wasn't Hollywood choreography. This was life or death strategy against a sophisticated criminal organization. Detective Morris arrived with coffee and classified intelligence files. Pier 47 used to be a fish processing plant before the city condemned it 5 years ago. Perfect cover for illegal activities. Legitimate reason for trucks coming and going. Multiple levels for different operations, and water access for quick escapes. Through surveillance photos, they could see the scope of Torino's setup. The main warehouse had been converted into what looked like a professional fighting arena, complete with luxury seating, professional lighting, and camera equipment. This wasn't just underground fighting. It was a major criminal enterprise broadcasting to wealthy clients worldwide. "Security assessment?" Seagal asked, studying thermal imaging from a police helicopter flyover. "At least 20 armed guards, probably. More inside. Vehicles positioned for quick evacuation. And Steven, we've identified some of the arriving guests. These aren't just local crime figures. We're seeing international arms dealers, human traffickers, people who pay premium prices for the most extreme entertainment. The implications were staggering. Torino hadn't just created an illegal fighting circuit. He'd built a network that served the world's most dangerous criminals. Young fighters weren't just being exploited for gambling. They were being sacrificed for the entertainment of monsters. Rebecca and Tommy arrived despite Seagal's explicit instructions to stay away. Both teenagers carried equipment bags and wore expressions of absolute determination. "We told you," Rebecca began. "I heard what you told me," Seagal interrupted. "And I'm telling you that walking into that warehouse means probable death. These people don't take prisoners." "Neither do we," Tommy replied with surprising steel in his voice. "Danny's in there because he tried to save Master Watanabe. We're not abandoning him." Morris studied the teenagers with professional assessment. "They might actually be useful, Steven. Small, fast, less obvious than adult backup. And they know. The victims personally could help with extraction." Seagal considered this reluctantly. The tactical situation was impossible for a single operator, no matter how skilled. But involving civilians, especially teenagers, violated every principle of responsible leadership. "If you come, you follow orders absolutely," he said finally. "No heroics, no improvisation, no exceptions. One mistake kills everyone we're trying to save." Rebecca nodded soberly. "We understand. Do you?" Seagal's voice carried the weight of decades spent in similar situations. Because understanding intellectually and maintaining discipline when bullets start flying are completely different things. As evening approached, they finalized their infiltration plan. Seagal would enter as expected, drawing security attention while Rebecca and Tommy approached from the water side. Simple in concept, but requiring perfect timing and nerves of steel. Looking at his unlikely team, Seagal felt the familiar mixture of pride and terror that came with leading others into mortal danger. Tonight would test everything he'd tried, to teach them about courage, skill, and sacrifice. The warehouse district at night resembled an industrial graveyard. Empty buildings casting long shadows under flickering streetlights, the sound of water lapping against rotting piers providing an ominous soundtrack. Seagal approached Pier 47 exactly on schedule, his movements tracked by multiple hidden sentries. Kane met him at the main entrance, flanked by armed guards who'd learned to respect the legendary martial artist's capabilities. The casual arrogance was gone, replaced by professional wariness. "Welcome to the big leagues, movie star," Kane said, but his voice lacked the mocking confidence of their previous encounters. "Mr. Torino's been looking forward to meeting you personally." Inside, the transformed warehouse exceeded even Seagal's expectations. What had once processed fish now hosted the most sophisticated illegal fighting operation he'd ever encountered. A central octagonal cage dominated the space, surrounded by tiered luxury seating where dozens of expensively dressed spectators waited with anticipation. Vincent Torino rose from a private box overlooking the arena, his silver hair and tailored suit making him look more like a corporate executive than a crime boss. But his eyes held the cold calculation of someone who'd built an empire on human suffering. "Steven Seagal," Torino called out, his voice carrying easily through the warehouse's acoustics. "Thank you for accepting my invitation. I trust you'll find tonight's entertainment educational." Seagal scanned the upper levels, noting camera positions, guard placements, and potential weapons. Through reinforced glass windows, he could see Danny and Master Watanabe in what looked like a holding area, conscious but clearly terrified. "The rules are simple," Torino announced to his audience. "Our guest will face 3 opponents in succession. Victory in all 3 matches earns freedom for himself and his friends. Failure at any stage results in permanent consequences for everyone involved." The crowd murmured with excitement, their wealth insulating them from any moral consideration of what they were witnessing. To them, this was ultimate entertainment, watching a legend fight for lives instead of money. "Your first opponent," Torino continued, "is someone who's been eager for a rematch." A side door opened to reveal Marcus Briggs, but the arrogant MMA fighter had been transformed. His body showed signs of chemical enhancement, unnaturally. Bulked muscles, dilated pupils, and movements that suggested artificially boosted reflexes and pain tolerance. "Hello again, movie star," Briggs grinned, his voice carrying the slight slur of someone under pharmaceutical influence. Ready to finish what we started? But Seagal wasn't focused on Briggs anymore. His trained eyes had spotted something in the crowd that changed everything. Rebecca and Tommy, disguised as service staff, moving through the spectator area with purpose. The teenagers had infiltrated successfully, but now they were trapped inside with him. The rescue mission had become a survival situation for everyone involved. "Let the games begin," Torino announced, and the cage door clanged shut behind Seagal. The first battle was about to start, but the real war would be fought on multiple levels throughout the warehouse. The moment the cage door locked, Briggs exploded forward with inhuman speed, the chemical enhancement making him faster and stronger than any natural fighter. But Seagal had spent decades facing impossible odds. Artificial enhancement was just another variable to account for. Briggs's opening combination came like machine gun fire, but Seagal flowed around the strikes with liquid precision. The drugs made his opponent faster, but they also made him reckless, abandoning the disciplined technique that might have posed a real threat. When Briggs overcommit to a devastating hook, Seagal caught his wrist and demonstrated why aikido had survived for centuries. Using Briggs's artificially enhanced momentum against him, he sent the bigger man crashing into the cage wall with enough force to buckle the steel mesh. The crowd roared approval, but Seagal's attention was divided. Through the cage, he could see Rebecca and Tommy moving systematically through the spectator area, their server disguises allowing them access to areas guards ignored. They were heading toward the upper level where the hostages were held. Briggs recovered with unnatural speed, the enhancement drugs masking what should have been debilitating injuries. He charged again, this time with a wild tackle that would have overwhelmed most opponents. But Seagal simply wasn't there when the attack arrived, stepping aside and adding a subtle trip that sent Briggs face first into the opposite wall. "Is that all you've got, old man?" Briggs slurred, chemical confidence overriding physical evidence of his beating. "Not quite," Seagal replied calmly, then demonstrated a pressure point technique that worked regardless of pharmaceutical intervention. His finger touched a precise location on Briggs's neck, and the enhanced fighter collapsed like a deflated balloon. The sudden silence was deafening. The crowd had expected a prolonged battle between enhanced aggression and legendary skill. Instead, they'd witnessed surgical precision that ended the fight in minutes. Torino's voice cut through the stunned quiet. "Impressive, but that was just the warm-up." A second door opened, revealing a figure that made even Seagal pause. This wasn't another enhanced human. This was a professional killer wearing full tactical gear, moving with the mechanical precision of someone who'd murdered for money across multiple continents. "Meet our international specialist," Torino announced. "No enhancement needed, just 20 years of eliminating targets for the highest bidders." The killer entered the cage without fanfare, his movements economical and purposeful. Unlike Briggs's drug-fueled aggression, this opponent radiated the calm competence of someone who viewed violence as a technical skill rather than emotional release. Meanwhile, Rebecca had reached the hostage area and was working on the electronic locks with tools Tommy had somehow acquired. They had minutes before their presence was discovered, and Seagal needed to keep all attention focused on the cage. The professional killer attacked without warning or waste motion, his techniques a mixture of military combat training and street assassination methods. This wouldn't be about martial arts philosophy. This would be pure survival against someone who'd made killing his life's work. The real test was just beginning. The professional killer fought with methodical brutality that pushed Seagal to his limits. Unlike Briggs's enhanced but sloppy aggression, this opponent used precise techniques designed to disable and kill efficiently. Every movement served a purpose. Every strike targeted vital areas with surgical accuracy. Seagal found himself adapting continuously, his decades of experience called upon to counter combinations he'd never faced before. The killer used environmental weapons, pieces of the cage itself, debris from previous fights, anything that could cause damage in confined space. When the assassin produced a ceramic knife seemingly from nowhere, the crowd's excitement reached fever pitch. This was the kind of extreme violence they'd paid premium prices to witness. A legendary martial artist fighting for his life against a professional killer. But Seagal's greatest advantage wasn't his fighting skill, it was his ability to think tactically while under maximum stress. He'd noticed the killer's pattern: precise, effective, but predictable to someone with enough experience reading opponents. The next exchange proved decisive. When the killer committed to a throat strike with the ceramic blade, Seagal used a classic aikido technique to redirect the attack while simultaneously controlling the weapon arm. The blade ended up buried in the cage wall, while its former wielder found himself in a submission hold that rendered chemical enhancement irrelevant. "Yield," Seagal commanded, his voice carrying absolute authority. The killer, recognizing genuine mastery when faced with it, tapped out immediately. Professional respect transcended criminal employment. He knew when he was outclassed. 2 down. But Torino's expression suggested the real test was yet to come. "Magnificent," the crime boss called out. But now we reach the evening's true entertainment. The final door opened to reveal something that made Seagal's blood run cold. Not another fighter, but Master Watanabe himself, obviously drugged and moving with unnatural aggression. The elderly sensei's eyes were dilated and unfocused, his traditional discipline replaced by chemical-induced violence. "Your final opponent is your own student's teacher," Torino announced with sadistic pleasure. "Defeat him to save your friends, or refuse to fight and watch everyone die. Either way, we get remarkable footage for our international audience." The crowd leaned forward in anticipation. This was the ultimate in extreme entertainment, forcing a protector to battle someone he was sworn to defend. Master Watanabe entered, the cage moving like a man possessed, his traditional techniques twisted into aggressive attacks by whatever drug cocktail they'd given him. But behind the chemical haze, Seagal could see the old master's true self, trapped and horrified by his own actions. Meanwhile, Rebecca and Tommy had reached the hostage-holding area only to discover Danny wasn't there. A guard's radio crackled, with orders to move the backup insurance to a more secure location. They were running out of time, and their primary objective was no longer where intelligence suggested. In the cage, Seagal faced an impossible choice: defeat a drugged friend to save others, or find a way to neutralize the threat without harming someone who was as much a victim as anyone else. The final battle would test more than fighting skills. It would test the very principles that separated heroes from monsters. Fighting Master Watanabe required everything Seagal had learned about control and restraint. The elderly sensei moved with drug-enhanced aggression that violated every principle he'd spent a lifetime teaching. But behind the chemical haze, Seagal could see his friend's true self, trapped and horrified. Every technique had to be perfect, enough force to neutralize the threat, but not enough to seriously injure a man whose body couldn't handle the stress of prolonged combat. Seagal used Aikido's most advanced principles, redirecting the drugged master's attacks while gradually exhausting the artificial energy the chemicals provided. The crowd watched in fascination as two masters of different generations engaged in what looked like a deadly dance. But trained eyes could see what the spectators missed. Seagal was systematically breaking down the drug's effects through pressure point techniques that disrupted the chemical enhancement without causing permanent damage. "Fight him properly," Torino shouted, realizing his carefully planned psychological torture wasn't delivering the brutal spectacle his clients expected. "Kill or be killed." But Seagal ignored the demands, focused entirely on the delicate task of saving his friend while appearing to fight him. When Master Watanabe collapsed from exhaustion and chemical withdrawal, Seagal caught him gently and lowered him to the mat with obvious respect. The arena fell silent. The crowd had paid for extreme violence and psychological destruction, but instead they'd witnessed something they didn't understand: mercy combined with skill so advanced it transcended their comprehension. "Touching," Torino said, his voice dripping with disgust, but ultimately meaningless. Kane appeared in the upper viewing area, dragging Danny between armed guards. The teenager looked terrified but unbroken, his eyes meeting Seagal's with desperate hope. "Here's your final choice, movie star," Torino announced. "I've decided the rules were too simple. You've won your 3 fights, but I'm not feeling generous. Your student dies anyway, unless you agree to permanent employment with my organization." The trap was complete. Seagal had passed every test, met every challenge, but Torino had never intended to honor any agreement. The crime boss wanted the legendary martial artist as a permanent asset, using Danny's life as leverage for eternal compliance. But as Torino savored his moment of triumph, he failed to notice that Rebecca and Tommy had found a different kind of leverage. Throughout the warehouse, they'd been placing small devices, not weapons, but something potentially more destructive to a criminal organization that depended on secrecy. Hidden cameras, broadcasting equipment, transmission devices that were sending live footage of the entire operation to news stations, police departments, and federal agencies across the country. Mr. Torino, Seagal said calmly, I believe you're about to discover what real consequences look like. Outside, the sound of helicopters grew louder as federal agencies responded to what was already being called the crime story of the decade. The hunter was about to become the hunted. The sound of rotors filled the warehouse as federal helicopters surrounded the building, their searchlights turning night into day. Torino's expression shifted from triumph to panic as he realized his carefully hidden operation was being broadcast live to law enforcement agencies nationwide. What did you do? Torino snarled, his composure finally cracking. I taught my students well, Seagal replied, gesturing toward the hidden cameras Rebecca and Tommy had placed throughout the facility. Traditional martial arts emphasize preparation and strategy, not just fighting. The wealthy spectators, realizing they were being recorded participating in illegal activities, panicked and rushed toward exits that were already blocked by federal agents. Their expensive clothes and influential connections meant nothing when faced with evidence of participating in organized crime. Kane released Danny and reached for his weapon, but the teenager had learned more than fighting techniques during his captivity. Danny used the chaos to slip away, applying the escape techniques Seagal had taught him to reach the main floor. Sensei, Danny called out, his voice carrying relief and determination. Master Watanabe needs medical attention. But Torino wasn't finished. Cornered and desperate, he produced a pistol and aimed it directly at the unconscious Master Watanabe. Nobody moves, or the old man dies right here. The standoff that followed crystallized everything the evening had represented. On one side stood organized crime, willing to murder innocent people to maintain power and profit. On the other stood the principles that made civilization possible: protection of the weak, respect for tradition, and the courage to stand against evil regardless of personal cost. Seagal stepped forward slowly, his hands visible but ready. Mr. Torino, you're surrounded by federal agents with cameras recording everything. Killing an unconscious elderly man won't save you. It'll just guarantee life imprisonment instead of a negotiated sentence. Maybe, Torino replied, his voice shaking with rage and fear. But I'll take some of you with me. The shot, when it came, was deafening in the enclosed space. But it wasn't Torino who fired. Detective Morris, having infiltrated with the federal team, had positioned himself for a clear shot when the crime boss became focused on his confrontation with Seagal. The bullet took Torino in the shoulder, spinning him away from his hostage and sending his weapon skittering across the floor. Vincent Torino, you're under arrest, Morris announced, his service weapon trained on the wounded crime boss. And, thanks to your performance tonight, we've got about 50 different federal charges to choose from. Kane and the remaining guards, realizing their organization was finished, surrendered without further resistance. The entire criminal network that had threatened traditional martial arts schools across the country was collapsing in real time. As paramedics attended to Master Watanabe and federal agents processed the arrested criminals, Seagal gathered his students around him. Danny, Rebecca, and Tommy had all been transformed by their experience. No longer just martial arts students, but young people who'd faced genuine evil and chosen to stand against it. Is it over? Rebecca asked, watching the crime boss being loaded into an ambulance under heavy guard. This part is, Seagal replied. But the real work starts now, rebuilding what they tried to destroy. 3 weeks later, the transformation was remarkable. Federal prosecutors were building cases against Torino's organization that would dismantle similar operations nationwide. The live broadcast from the warehouse had sparked congressional investigations into organized crimes infiltration of youth sports, leading to new protections for traditional martial arts schools. Master Watanabe had recovered fully from his ordeal, though the experience had aged him visibly. The chemicals they'd used to control him had left no permanent physical damage, but the psychological trauma of being forced to attack someone he respected would take longer to heal. The dojo will reopen next week, he announced to the assembled students in the temporary training space they'd set up in a community center. Thanks to donations from people who saw the broadcasts, we have enough funding to not just repair, but expand. The response to the warehouse footage had been overwhelming. Traditional martial arts schools across the country had received unprecedented support from communities that finally understood what these institutions represented. Not just fighting techniques, but character development and protection for vulnerable young people. Danny stood before the group, his broken nose healed, but leaving a slight deviation that would always remind him of how much he'd grown. I wanted to thank everyone who helped save Master Watanabe and me. But mostly, I wanted to announce something. He turned to face Seagal, who had been quietly observing from the back of the room. Sensei, would you consider staying on as a permanent instructor? Not as a janitor, but as a teacher? The question hung in the air with weight beyond its simple words. Seagal had spent decades as a solitary figure, but his time at Riverside Academy had reminded him of something he'd forgotten: the satisfaction of passing on knowledge to students who would use it to protect others. I would be honored, Seagal replied simply. The celebration that followed was interrupted by Detective Morris, who brought news about the ongoing investigations. Torino's organization was bigger than we thought, he reported, but also more fragile. Take out the leadership and the whole structure collapses. We've identified and arrested operators in 12 states. Rebecca, ever analytical, had been tracking the broader implications. The media coverage changed how people think about martial arts, she observed. It's not just about fighting anymore. People understand it's about character and community. Tommy, his easy confidence now tempered with genuine wisdom, added his own perspective. And bullies think twice when they know their victims might have real training. But the most significant change was in Danny himself. The shy, insecure teenager who'd been brutalized in a sparring session had become a confident young man who helped teach beginning students. His experience with genuine evil had burned away his self-doubt, leaving someone who understood that courage wasn't the absence of fear, it was acting despite fear to protect others. The new dojo will have space for expanded programs, Master Watanabe announced. Self-defense classes for seniors, women's safety training, programs for at-risk youth. We're not just teaching fighting techniques, we're building community defenders. As the meeting ended and students began filing out, Seagal remained behind with Master Watanabe, both men contemplating how a simple investigation had grown into something that would affect thousands of lives. You have honored our traditions, Seagal-sensei, Master Watanabe said quietly, and created new ones. Outside, the sound of construction equipment indicated that rebuilding was already underway. But the real reconstruction of confidence, community, and the understanding that good people must stand together against evil was just beginning. 6 months after the warehouse raid, Riverside Martial Arts Academy had become something unprecedented in its 40-year history, not just a local dojo, but a symbol of how traditional values could triumph over modern corruption. The new facility was larger and more comprehensive than the original, featuring separate training areas for different age groups and skill levels. But the most significant change was philosophical rather than physical. The school had evolved from a place where students learned fighting techniques into a community center where people of all ages came to understand what it meant to use strength in service of others. Danny Morrison stood at the front of the beginners class, demonstrating basic blocks to a group of nervous newcomers that included adults twice his age. His broken nose had healed with a slight crook that he wore like a badge of honor, visible, proof that he'd faced real violence and emerged stronger. Remember, Danny told his students, martial arts isn't about being able to hurt people. It's about being confident enough that you don't need to hurt people unless someone you care about is in danger. In the advanced class, Rebecca was teaching tactical awareness to a group that included off-duty police officers and military veterans. Her analytical mind had proven perfectly suited to breaking down complex situations into manageable components. Tommy worked with the youth program, his natural athleticism and easy manner making him popular with teenagers who might otherwise resist traditional discipline. But beneath his friendly exterior was steel that had been forged in genuine crisis. At the center of it all was Seagal himself, no longer hiding his identity or abilities. 3 evenings a week, he taught advanced classes that drew students from across the region, not thrill seekers hoping to learn movie fighting, but serious martial artists who understood they were learning from a living legend. Today we practice Randori, Seagal announced to his evening class. Remember, we are not trying to defeat our partners. We are helping each other improve. Master Watanabe, now officially retired but still providing wisdom and guidance, watched from his chair near the shrine to previous masters. His ordeal had left him frailer physically, but his spirit remained unbroken. If anything, surviving. Torino's psychological warfare had strengthened his conviction about what traditional martial arts could accomplish. Danny-san, Master Watanabe called out as the evening classes concluded. Walk with me. They stepped outside into the cool evening air, the rebuilt dojo glowing warmly behind them. Other students were gathering their gear and heading home to families who now understood that their children were learning something more valuable than self-defense techniques. You have become what I always hoped you would, Master Watanabe told his former student. Not just a skilled fighter, but a teacher and protector. Danny looked back at the building where so much had changed for all of them. I never thought I'd be teaching other people. 6 months ago, I was the one getting beat up. That is exactly why you are a good teacher, Master Watanabe replied with a gentle smile. You remember what it feels like to be afraid, to be vulnerable. That makes you compassionate instructor. Through the windows, they could see Seagal organizing equipment with the same methodical care he'd shown as a janitor. But now his students helped him, understanding that maintaining their training space was part of the discipline they were learning. Seagal-sensei has found his place, Master Watanabe observed. He was searching for something when he came here. I think he found it. As the last lights went out and the dojo settled into peaceful quiet, the legacy of their confrontation with organized crime continued to ripple outward. Other schools had adopted their community-focused model. Law enforcement agencies regularly consulted with traditional martial arts instructors about youth programs. Most importantly, a generation of young people had learned that strength was meant to serve others, not dominate them. Danny locked the front door and set the security system, his movements confident and sure. Tomorrow would bring new students, new challenges, new opportunities to prove that when good people stood together, evil could not triumph. In the end, that was the most important lesson any martial arts school could teach, not how to fight, but when to fight and what was worth fighting for. The story that had begun with a broken nose had become something larger. Proof that heroes still walked among us, ready to act when needed, and willing to pass their wisdom on to anyone brave enough to learn. The dojo stood silent in the darkness, but it was the silence of strength at rest, not weakness in hiding. And in that silence, the promise of justice and protection waited for the next time it would be needed. If you like the story, please watch another story on our channel and subscribe to the channel.